One of the most fascinating things about living in America in this current day and age, in this current year, in this current time, is the idea that anything at any point in time can be shifted from being about the thing that it's actually about to being about another thing, and that other thing is in fact racism. And a perfect example of this is the Gabby Petito story, and I'm not going to break down this whole thing for you guys because you should have heard it already. If not, you must be getting all your information from me, and I don't recommend this. But Gabby Petito, on a road trip with her boyfriend, left from New York all the way to Wyoming. They videoed it the whole way. She had some social media presence, some social media following. Boyfriend returns from Wyoming to Florida without the girlfriend, lawyers up, and people start looking for the girl. Pretty girl, you can see her photos, all that. It gets national attention, and somehow this issue with two white people, white families, white people mostly interested, women specifically, the true crime gals out there. Not all, because there are some non-white true crime gals. It seems to be a female thing. Get really into it. People start reporting on it. The coverage kind of snowballs. And ultimately, and unfortunately, they end up finding her body. Now, somehow, this is racist because black people didn't get enough of this attention. Which is crazy, but I guess if you're digging for racism, everything's a gold mine if you're a race grifter. Noble gold transition. All right. Sorry about that. The word tapering is being thrown around across the media. And what that word actually means is that the federal government owes about $30 trillion, and they intend to take that $30 trillion out of your pocket. You need to protect yourself from the Federal Reserve because even they are starting to acknowledge that Janet Yellen's claims just 4 years ago that we'd never see another financial crisis in our lifetime are just not true. But Noble Gold's got you covered. Start a precious metals IRA or 401k with them and you'll be able to hedge your investments against inflation. And for this month, you will be able to get yourself an America the Beautiful 5-ounce silver coin as a gift for joining this month. This coin's awesome. It's a giant quarter. It's 5 ounces of silver. I actually really like it, and I'm grateful that they sent it to me. And if you want to get one, go to noblegoldinvestments.com using my affiliate link, pin, comment, and top of the description of this video, or call them at 877-646-5347. Again, Noble Gold, hedge against inflation. You guys know the drill. Let's get into the video. So I've decided to slip this in at some random moment in the video so that you guys can be distracted by it. But on Wednesday, this Wednesday, I believe it's October 6th, I should be appearing on the show You Are Here. It's on The Blaze. Elijah Schaefer, Sydney Watson are the hosts. Their channel's called You Are Here. Come and watch me, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central. Oh yeah, I nailed the time zone. Also, I'm on Instagram. Instagram.com/actualjustice. Follow me over there, guys. Come on. I'm expanding to all the platforms. Follow me. So the basic premise of what we're going to be talking about is whether or not there is a racial component to the idea of who gets coverage in missing persons coverage. And if so, if there is that racial component due to a bias towards white people, specifically white women? And the reason we need to emphasize this in two parts is because there's actually some interesting data that I've had sent to me that does show that white women missing do tend to make it to national coverage far more often than other women when they go missing. And forget about men. We're not even talking about them. Unless you're a kid, you're totally not interesting. This is totally a woman thing. However, I just want to set aside something that needs to be pointed out because we're talking about the Gabby Petito case as this framing device. Like, this is what Joy Reid used as a case to talk about this missing white woman syndrome.
Without saying that no family should ever have to endure that kind of pain. And the Petito family certainly deserves answers and justice. But the way this story has captivated the nation has many wondering, why not the same media attention when people of color go missing? Well, the answer actually has a name: missing white woman syndrome, the term coined by the late and great Gwen Ifill to describe the media and public fascination with missing white women like Laci Peterson or Natalie Holloway, while ignoring cases involving missing people of color.
So that's Joy Reid's take. Of course it's her take. It's hilarious that she runs a national show and she never covers missing women of color. Also, a lot of these segments, and I will give credit because I believe they did highlight some missing women of color in this segment, never even name these people. They just say 700 native people went missing at this period of time, and nobody talked about that. Even though when you look into those numbers, you find out that something like 85% of these people were actually found in like a week, and most of them were all right. They just showed up. So you throw out 70% of that 700. Also, a bunch of them are repeats, so it's 700 missing persons reports. And also, even when they are killed or something bad does happen to them, they typically find their body incredibly quickly. And this is going to be the first delineation between the Gabby Petito case and your normal missing persons cases, because I will submit for you guys in the court of law, in the court of public opinion, in the court that is this YouTube channel that is not a court, that what you need for a missing persons tale to go national is a national hook. You need unique circumstances in order to power that. And of course, a young, attractive woman is going to be one component of that. Also, the media loves showing footage of missing people. They love photos and images, smiling, happy, etc. So that helps. You have something to display for the public. This girl was literally filming her whole way. She had a whole Instagram page. She was on TikTok. This was all good stuff for the media to put forward for this girl. Also, there is a bias for New Yorkers against other groups. It's just a fact. Petito's father lived out in Long Island, which is over that way, in case you needed to know where that was in proportion to me. The national media is located in New York, so local media is far more likely to push a story to the national forefront if they are near New York. Also, you need some intrigue. The fact that the boyfriend showed up, he didn't say anything, he lawyered up, that also added into it. Also, another thing that powered interest in the Gabby Petito case was the fact that it was, in actuality, a national story. This is the driving route, as put out by the media, that they took on their way to Wyoming. Every one of these states could have had clues that could have led to somebody discovering where she was. On top of that, after they got to this point, and ultimately Gabby Petito ended up being murdered, obviously everybody thinks it's the boyfriend because it's likely the boyfriend took off from Wyoming and then went to Florida. So every single state from Wyoming to Florida is also involved in this case. So it is quite literally a missing persons case that covers the course of the continental US. Thus, national interest makes a lot of sense. But setting aside all the ridiculousness of bringing this up now and attacking white people now because people were concerned on the internet about this missing girl, the overall reason that people don't get coverage when they're non-white and non-female in the media is due to the fact that the perpetrators of these cases don't align with another media strategy, and of course I'm talking about their desire to underreport minority crime in this country. So Gabby Petito's white, obviously, and this is what the media is focusing on. She's a white girl, that's why everybody's getting attention, but more importantly, her boyfriend's white. Everybody involved in this story is likely to be white, and the boyfriend is the most obvious suspect in the history of obvious. So the media knows when they cover this tale, they're likely not to show up with a minority perpetrator, because that's not something that they want to display in the public. When a native goes missing and there's something nefarious afoot, the perpetrator is likely going to be another native. When a black person goes missing, and again, there's something nefarious afoot, the perpetrator is likely to be black. And we see this play out time and time again in our media. Just think about the way that police shootings get reported in this country. If a white cop shoots an unarmed black person, the headline will be unarmed black person shot. If a non-white cop shoots an unarmed black person, like let's say a black cop, then the headline will just be cop shoots unarmed black person. And if it's not a black person that's shot, it won't even make a headline. It will just say police shooting, no details known, because then all of a sudden the races don't matter because the media can't gin up hysteria and promote a racial narrative. And we see this happen all the time. Chauvin, white cop, that's the headline. White cop, knee on neck. Michael Brown, white cop involved. White cop shoots black person. But when we go to a case like Baltimore with Freddie Gray, all of a sudden, it's police and how police as an institution hold up white supremacy. That's because of the 8 cops they tried to implicate in the Freddie Gray situation, 4 of them were black, and I don't believe that the other 4 were exclusively white, although I could be wrong on that. You guys can fact check me, write it down in the comments, and I will be sure to delete it before reading it, because that's not the point I'm trying to make. But I know a lot of you are out there and ready to go. So the media has an obvious narrative that they want to stick to, and this prevents black women, native women, and other minority women who go missing from getting attention because they don't want to cover the reality of black crime in this nation. And by the way, we've seen this happen in real time. Do you guys remember the Jasmine Barnes story? This little 7-year-old girl who was shot on New Year's Day in Houston, Texas, and it was suspected early on that a white person in a hoodie was responsible for the shooting. Shaun King got involved, NBA players got involved, they started donating their game day checks to the family. The Young Turks did multiple videos not only calling out this alleged white shooter, but President Donald Trump for questionable reasons.
Gunman has been described as a bearded white man in his 40s who was wearing a red hooded sweatshirt and driving a red pickup truck at the time of the incident. Police told The Times that they're still establishing a motive and have not ruled out the possibility of a racially motivated hate crime. Important to note that while he is a white man, the family is black.
And so this is terrorism, and we don't know why he did it, but it's not related to anything else. She's not involved in anything. Look, it bothers me that I have to think about it and she has to think about it and we all have to think about, did she do something wrong? She didn't, right? Obviously it's relevant because if there was an earlier dispute, that would explain why it happened, right? But there is no earlier dispute. There was no dispute on the highway. There was no dispute before that. They don't know each other. And look, we don't know what's in the guy's head. He was wearing a red sweatshirt, not a red hat.
It's been almost a week since 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes was shot and killed in Houston, Texas, and her killer is still to be found. Despite a $100,000 reward offered by Shaun King and attorney Lee Merritt, the perpetrator of this atrocity remains at large. Which does beg the question, why is there not more coverage of this horrific tragedy? Now that's not to say there hasn't been any coverage. Outlets such as CNN and NBC have dedicated substantial airtime to help identify the suspect and shed light on the death of this sweet young girl. But of course, outlets like Fox News, well, they gave Jasmine's murder a solid 30-second blip. But if you are waiting for the president to lend his substantial reach to help identify the suspect, well, I wouldn't hold my breath unless there are murmurs of the suspect being a Muslim or an immigrant or Elizabeth Warren. This face should be on the front page of every outlet, on every news screen, and yes, on the president's Twitter page until the perpetrator is found. A 7-year-old girl was gunned down in cold blood.
This is 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes. She was in a car with her mother and 3 sisters when an unknown bearded white male in his 40s wearing a red sweater pulled up in a red pickup truck and opened fire at the car she was in. It says a lot about our culture when a person randomly decides to gun you down and your first instinct is to blame yourself. But as LaPortia Washington pointed out, she did nothing wrong. And with no answers as to why this may have happened, the police have not ruled out the possibility that this could be a racially motivated hate crime. So let's talk about that for a second.
This was, despite the whining from the progressive media and progressives online, a national story solely due to the fact that it was alleged that a white person shot an innocent young girl. This was dead black girl at the hand of a white guy syndrome. Now, if you're not aware, it turns out that the white person that was declared a suspect by the national media and by the left-wing media that drove away was driving away because people were shooting and he did not want to die. The actual shooters of 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes were 2 black dudes. One of them was literally named Eric Black Jr. Couldn't get more black than that. But there's something that's absolutely fascinating that happened when it was discovered that these 2 black people actually were the ones who ended up shooting 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes. The case went from being a national story to being a hyper-local story. In fact, if you Google Jasmine Barnes trial update or Eric Black Jr. trial status, you're not going to find any information because the media completely stopped covering it because it just became another mundane instance of black on black crime, of shooting gone awry. They said mistaken identity or whatever. It doesn't matter. Nobody's paying attention anymore. They're not following this to trial. There's not cameras in the courtroom because all of a sudden the intrigue that the media put forward about the case initially is just not there anymore. Shaun King washed his hands of it. The Young Turks haven't talked about it since their post video on it when they actually found the people because there's no more interest in the case anymore, which is quite fascinating because, again, she didn't get unmurdered once we found out the 2 black dudes were responsible for her crime. She's just as dead. These guys are just gonna go on trial, And we knew for a fact, had it been the white person that they were looking for, they would be following this all the way through. Even though it was an open and shut case, they would be pretending like the white guy was going to get off due to some kind of white supremacy in the very left-wing city, by the way, of Houston, Texas. So if we accept the basic premise that missing white woman syndrome is actually a thing, and there is disproportionate coverage to young, attractive white women as compared to women of color, we also have to follow that implication to its logical conclusion and ask ourselves why we're not covering this, because we know for a fact that every single hate crime hoax against a person of color gets national attention before it's revealed to be a hoax. I covered one specifically in Wisconsin that was absurd on its face, got national coverage. The police found out that this girl was lying about literally every detail, and the place where she said it happened was under surveillance and she was never there. And then all of a sudden the case was dropped because, again, this story had the prospect of white perpetrators. So it's not that the media is against covering women of color that go missing. It's that the media is against covering the actual likely perpetrators when a woman of color goes missing. And to pin this on white people, to flip it around and say that it's white people only caring about white people, it's just not the case. It's regressive leftists that don't want to portray a negative image of minorities actually hurting search efforts for minorities in order to protect minority criminals. And by the way, this is a well-established bias. You can find papers from the 1990s, early 2000s, about how even the villains in TV shows tend not to be representative of the demographics of the people actually committing the crimes where the show is supposed to take place. Law and Order has been called out for dramatically overrepresenting white perpetrators in their shows for years, and we've been able to distill this. We've done studies on this, and when confronted with this, a lot of these producers say we're intentionally undersampling or undershowing, underrepresenting minority perpetrators because we don't want to play into stereotypes, because according to them, displaying reality is playing into stereotypes. By the way, cops did the exact same thing. Cops would film people going through their job as police officers. They'd have a bunch of interactions, and they actually had a system for suppressing the number of black criminals that appear on the show. And you can notice this if you're paying attention to cops and you notice like the cities that they're in, and you realize that they're stopping a lot of white people in these cities, and there's not really a good argument for it. Now look, that is my rational, measured take on the situation at hand after looking at the data and knowing what the media actually likes to focus on versus what they don't like to focus on. Because in reality, when a story becomes national news, it's an anomaly. It's always an anomaly, but you can notice the patterns that reinforce the anomalies bubbling up to the surface. However, the Young Turks decided to take it in a little bit of a different direction. And I'm talking about their show Damage Report, which is hosted by John Iadarola and now has failed congressional candidate Nina Turner on. And I just want to give you her perspective on what Joy Ann Reid's comments should make us reflect upon, because I think it's hilarious. And I also want to emphasize to the people who are like, the Bernie people aren't the woke crazy people. This is a Bernie person. She backed him the whole time. This is somebody backed by the progressives. And yes, she is in fact a crazy woke person. Let's roll the clip.
There is something a little extra to when it is a white woman. And again, this has to do with our socialization in the United States of America, something that we do not want to face when it is about the value of white lives over black lives or any other lives of color.
So of course, Nina Turner gives us some word soup about how it's our socialization and about the value of white lives versus other lives of color. And no, I just explained to you what's going on. They actually are valuing the feelings or the idea that representation creates reality over black victims. So it's the valuing of criminals, the protection of criminals, the denial of crime and who's actually committing the crime that fuels the lack of coverage of black missing women or black missing people, because again, those perpetrators are so much more likely to be black. Now I'm going to go into this next thing that Nina Turner brings up because she thinks it proves her point. but we're going to talk about how it 100% confirms my point.
It's reminded me of a tragic story here in Cleveland. It's called the Sowell Murders, if anybody wants to look that up. And these were Black women. A lot of them were drug addicted women. And Sowell, this guy, was killing these women, and they were buried in his backyard. And these women, one woman in particular, I remember, who had escaped momentarily, got to the police. They did not believe her because of her status. You know, she wasn't all prime and proper. Because of her status, they did not believe her and actually gave her back to this man. So look up the Sowell Murders as an example. It is a tragedy.
So needless to say, the Sowell Murderers, like spelled like Thomas Sowell, or the Cleveland Strangler case, didn't get the national attention that something like a Ted Bundy did. Ted Bundy, a very similar serial killer to this person, strangled hookers or women that he picked up, buried them wherever. I don't know if Ted buried them in the home. Nina Turner actually underplayed this. He buried some in his home. He stuffed some in crawl spaces and in the backyard. And according to Nina Turner, a Black woman came to the police and demanded help. And then the police gave this adult Black woman back to this man. So let me just soothe your heart really quickly and tell you that this woman is still alive, and the police never gave an adult woman back to this man. Now, this woman was a prostitute. She was addicted to drugs, and Sowell was able to convince her, or convince the police more accurately, that she had broken into his place, and he ended up fighting her on the way out. And the police did not have grounds to actually search the place and then arrest him. So unfortunately, other people ended up dying because the police did not believe her version of events, because she was drug addicted and she had prior arrests. Now, to be clear, even though this woman had a record and she was the definition of an unreliable witness, the police did botch this, because Sowell, pictured here, by the way, wonder why he isn't as famous as somebody like Ted Bundy, based on that complexion, was actually at this for a long time. And he actually served time when another woman escaped from his home and went to the police and alleged that he had kidnapped her while she was pregnant, assaulted her, and was beating her. So she escaped, they arrested him, they convicted him of the assault, of the rape, and of the kidnapping, and he got 15 years in prison. The big distinction is that after he got out, he started up a relationship with the mayor's daughter, so that provided him some cover, and it caused the police to overlook his past sexual offense for a related crime, which they should not have done, and this is why they didn't believe this woman. But she's still alive. They did not return this woman to him. They went and searched the place, they found her blood, but his break-in story was quite convincing to these officers. Also, the fact that the mayor's daughter was involved definitely played a role, because they could smell something off in the house. The daughter of the mayor could smell something off in the house, but he kept playing it off like, oh, it was somebody making sausage next door, or oh, it was something like his stepmother just smelled really bad. Don't worry about it. So even though there was notable scent from dead bodies, the fact that the mayor's daughter was involved with this guy kind of cleared some suspicion of him. But again, this is an instance of a Black guy who was trusted as opposed to a drug addict, because he was seeing the right person in his life above the surface, and that caused him to be believed. By the way, the reason, again, that this guy didn't get national attention is because it was a Black dude, and people don't want to highlight a Black serial killer, no matter how similar this person was to Ted Bundy, and this is way more recent. I think they ended up catching this guy or convicting this guy in something like 2009, 2011, I forget when. But that's why this story didn't get enough attention, and the police, they definitely botched it, but they did not return an adult woman to the man's house. That's insane. Nina Turner made that up. Maybe she's having a delusional moment right now, you know, like when she thought she was going to win that congressional seat, but I don't know what to tell you. That's just not what happened in this case.
When it comes to systems and how we see and respond to tragic occurrences for Black people and other people of color, not just the media, but the legal system itself does not respond in the same way. Hence, Black Lives Matter.
So I don't know what Nina Turner's issue is with pronouncing S's in words, so I'm just going to leave it there and not comment on it any further, because it might be indicative of something that I don't want to draw too much negative attention to, but it is strange. And I love how she ends up getting to, that's why we say Black lives matter. Missing white girl, what's the moral of the tale? Black lives matter. Our political movement that's anti-police. I'm gonna make up a story about police returning a woman to a serial killer. That did not happen. Maybe she garbled it in her brain. It was an honest mistake, but sloppy from her, and why she should not be anywhere near the halls of power, if you're asking my opinion. And then I'm going to say law enforcement didn't help or whatever. There's similar tales with serial killers in the past that were white. Again, they target vulnerable victims because it works. And this guy, who was a black guy, was privileged in the person that he was dating. They even overlooked a violent sexual offense in his past and a kidnapping. So the police did botch it, don't get it twisted. But notice how Nina implies, by not saying anything, that Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler, was in fact a white person. It's just not the case. It's not true. She leaves it out. She emphasizes the race of the women, but she doesn't talk about how the police gave him the benefit of the doubt and didn't give the woman the benefit of the doubt because, again, she had likely a criminal history. It was an instance where both parties had relevant criminal histories to what they were being accused of, and what it looked like at the scene was debatable. So they sided with the homeowner, not the drug addict. And by the way, even more depressing in that story is that when she escaped, she actually went and banged on the doors of the neighbors. You know, this black neighborhood in Cleveland. All of the neighbors turned her away. Every single black resident in that community said that they didn't want to get involved with her situation. So the police could have came out that night, but she ended up having to escape and go home and then file the report later with the police. That was one of the biggest problems too, because there wasn't the sense of urgency because people in the neighborhood did not care about this woman. Now look, I'm not trying to amp up the blame on that neighborhood. There is such a thing called the bystander effect. There are a lot of problems in these neighborhoods, especially with women that are drug addicted, and I understand why people, when they hear banging on the door and they hear panicking, think it's some crazy person that shouldn't be on the streets in the first place, and they don't believe the tales that they tell. Remember, addicts lie all the time. This woman wasn't lying, and I believe that the idea that the police ended up believing the guy over her was really unfortunate because it led to the deaths of other women going forward. It was really sad. It's a terrible situation, but it's not really reflective of racism against the black woman. Maybe some gender bias or maybe a bias against her occupation, but not racism because they ultimately ended up siding with the black dude, the homeowner, in that situation. Look, all in all, even though you guys might think I'm coming up a little bit harsh on the people who are bringing this up, I want you to know that that's actually not the case. There is bias in reporting. The media highlights certain stories that fulfill a certain narrative. But one of the big problems that I have in a lot of the topics that are brought up by the left is that even when they're tangentially related to a point, sometimes they're just not properly identifying the problem. So any solution is going to just not end up working. If you don't point out that the media is more scared about who they're representing as criminals than concerned for the victims, then you're never going to resolve this problem that they've labeled missing white woman syndrome, which in reality is a denial of minority crime syndrome that the media is afflicted with. But hey, those are just my thoughts and opinions. Go through the research yourself and let me know your informed opinions down in the comments below. I'm actually leaving this open. I'm not going to call your opinions wrong opinions unless I read your comment. Then I'll just be like, wrong, incorrect, when I see something that's terrible. If you like the video, show me by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. Follow me on my new Instagram. I have a new Instagram. Follow me on there. Come on. Till next time.